The first time my wife spent my father's inheritance, he had been dead for 11 days, and no one had told us whether there was an inheritance at all. She was sitting at our kitchen island in Madison, Wisconsin, scrolling through photographs of a 5-bedroom lake house, while I still had my father's funeral suit hanging over the back of a chair. She tapped one picture and said, "This is what he should have left you instead of that depressing little farmhouse." I told her I could barely think about breakfast, much less buying a house. She answered, "Grief does not pay for a future, Ryan." 3 weeks later, she put a non-refundable deposit on a luxury SUV using our joint emergency card. At Thanksgiving, she announced to her entire family that we would soon be finally living at our level, because my father's orchard was worth millions. When I asked her to stop talking about his property as if he had died for her benefit, she leaned across the table and whispered, "If you will not share it willingly, I will divorce you and take what the law says is mine." I did not shout. I did not beg. I looked at the woman I had loved for 5 years and said, "Then file." She smiled because she thought I had surrendered. What she did not know was that my father had already decided what his land was worth, who deserved it, and exactly how to protect me from anyone who loved the money before they loved the man. My name is Ryan Keller. I was 36 and owned a heating and refrigeration company outside Madison. Keller Mechanical operated from a plain metal building behind a tire shop. I repaired restaurant coolers, apartment boilers, and furnaces that failed during Wisconsin winters. I came home smelling like metal, dust, and whatever restaurant kitchen had called me in a panic. My wife, Vanessa, hated that smell. She also hated the Vans, the work shirts, and the fact that I had no interest in dressing like the husbands she followed online. When we first met, she called my work ethic attractive. By our 5th anniversary, she called it evidence that I lacked ambition. My father, George Keller, understood the difference. He had spent 42 years repairing farm equipment near Baraboo, Wisconsin. He lived in a white farmhouse with a sagging porch, drove a 2001 Chevrolet pickup with a cracked dashboard, and wore the same brown coat every winter until the cuffs turned shiny. Vanessa considered all of it humiliating. "Your father has land and still dresses like he is waiting for a church donation," she once said after he came to our neighborhood carrying a box of apples. I told her he was comfortable. She replied, "Comfortable is what people call themselves when they have given up." George heard more of those comments than I realized. He never challenged her. He simply handed me the apples, asked whether the shop had enough work, and went home before dinner. My father was not poor. He just never treated money like a performance. His farmhouse sat on 84 acres of apple orchard and woodland outside Baraboo. He had bought most of the land in the late 1980s, before resorts and developers began turning nearby farmland into vacation property. George ignored every offer and kept growing apples. I knew the property had value, but I never asked how much. It was his home, not my retirement plan. Vanessa did not know about the offers until after his funeral. Before that, she treated George as an inconvenience. She complained when he parked his truck outside our house. She refused invitations to his Sunday dinners because he served roast chicken, potatoes, and pie, instead of taking us somewhere worth getting dressed for. Once, he arrived at my shop with homemade soup because I had been working 18-hour days during a winter cold snap. Vanessa stopped by, saw him eating from a paper bowl with my technicians, and later told me the scene looked like a shelter. I should have defended him more strongly. I told her she was being cruel, but then I softened it by saying she was stressed. That became the rhythm of our marriage. Vanessa made a cutting remark. I objected. She cried or became cold. I apologized for my tone. The insult remained, and I carried the shame of having failed to stop it. Her cruelty arrived as small corrections about Dad's boots, truck, and my work clothes. When I pushed back, she said she only wanted more for us. Vanessa worked in corporate event planning for a regional insurance company. She attended conferences at resorts, managed executive dinners, and spent her days around people who understood how photographs created status. Our home gradually became another event she was staging. Pillows no one could sit against. White chairs I was afraid to touch after work. Candles that were never lit because burned wicks looked messy. Every holiday required coordinated clothing and a social media caption about gratitude. George refused to play along. He wore clean jeans, brought pie, and sat wherever there was an empty chair. Vanessa smiled in photographs and cropped him out later. I noticed. I told myself it was about composition. That is what love can do when it is mixed with fear. It gives ordinary names to things that would otherwise require a decision. George began slowing down the spring before he died. He got winded walking from the barn to the house. He stopped attending the Wednesday farmers market and said younger people deserve the space. He complained about indigestion and brushed off my suggestion that he see a doctor. I am 74, he said. Everything has a noise now. I laughed. I wish I had not. 2 weeks later, a neighbor found him collapsed beside the kitchen table with the coffee maker still running. His heart had stopped before the ambulance reached the highway. I was replacing a compressor at a grocery store when my phone rang. My technician, Marcus Bell, had to take the wrench from my hand because I could no longer feel my fingers. Marcus had worked for me since he was 22. George had taught him how to rebuild an old tractor before Marcus could afford trade school. When I told him Dad was gone, Marcus closed the grocery cooler, drove me to Baraboo, and stayed until my aunt arrived. The funeral took place at a small Lutheran church near the orchard. George would have disliked the number of flowers. Neighbors brought casseroles, bread, smoked ham, and enough apple pie to feed the entire county. Vanessa wore black, hugged people at the correct moments, and posted a photograph of the orchard beneath the caption, "A beautiful legacy passes to the next generation." I saw the post that night. George had not been buried 6 hours. I asked her to delete it. "Why?" she said. "It is respectful. You wrote about his land before you wrote about him." Legacy means more than grief, Ryan. She deleted the post, but remained angry with me for making her look insensitive. 11 days later, I came home from the shop and found real estate listings open on her laptop. A modern house on Lake Mendota filled the screen. 5 bedrooms, private dock, glass walls, and a price of $1.8 million. My funeral suit still hung over the dining chair because I had not been able to put it away. "What is this?" I asked. Vanessa smiled as though she had solved a problem for both of us. "A fresh start. We have talked about leaving this neighborhood." "We have not." "I have." She rotated the laptop. "Your dad's land is worth at least $3 million, probably more. We could sell, pay off everything, buy this, and finally live without acting scared of money." "Who told you what the orchard is worth?" "Your aunt mentioned a developer at the funeral." I looked up nearby sales. "I've not even met with Dad's estate representative." "Then call him." "I'm not doing this." "Doing what?" "Planning purchases around my father's death." Her expression changed. Not guilt, annoyance. "Your father did not spend money while he was alive. That does not mean we have to continue his fear after he is gone. He was not afraid. He lived like a poor man while sitting on land that could have changed your life." "My life was not his debt." Vanessa shut the laptop. "Grief does not pay for a future, Ryan." The sentence did not sound like something said inside a marriage. It sounded like a slogan from a person trying to sell me out of my own mourning. I slept in the guest room that night. She told her sister I was punishing her for discussing practical matters. Her sister, Monica, texted me that Vanessa was grieving too, and I should not shut her out. Vanessa had seen George perhaps 8 times in 5 years. Yet her grief apparently required a lake house. Over the next month, every conversation began with, "Once the orchard sells." Vanessa test drove SUVs, discussed Italy, and accused me of hiding information whenever I reminded her that we did not know what George had left. Then she asked why we were still letting a dead man control our life. That sentence ended another piece of the marriage. I began spending more time at the shop because noise was easier than listening to her turn my father into a delayed payment, Marcus noticed. He did not ask personal questions. He began leaving a sandwich on my desk at noon and covering emergency calls when I drove to the orchard. The farmhouse remained mostly untouched. George's boots stood beside the back door. His reading glasses rested on the kitchen table. The final cup he had used sat upside down in the drying rack. I walked through those rooms and remembered ordinary things that had nothing to do with value. Him showing me how to sharpen a mower blade, burning pancakes after Mom died, teaching me that a repair was not finished simply because the machine started. "Stay long enough to hear whether it runs right," he always said. I had left my marriage running because I was afraid to listen closely. During one visit, I found a stack of letters inside a kitchen drawer. Most came from Heartland Trades House, a nonprofit in Madison that provided temporary housing and apprenticeships for young adults leaving foster care. George had donated quietly for years. One thank you letter mentioned Marcus by name. I called him from the porch. "Did Dad help you through Heartland?" Silence. Then Marcus said, "He told me not to make a story out of it." Marcus had aged out of foster care at 18 and slept in his car while working at a farm equipment yard. George helped him enter an electrical repair program, paid for work boots, and gave him weekend jobs at the orchard. Why did he never tell me? I asked. Because he did not want you thinking you owed him for being decent. Vanessa had mistaken quietness for emptiness because she understood only generosity performed in public. The representative handling George's affairs was a woman named Helen Morris, a retired credit union manager who had been his friend for 30 years. She called in August and said George had left instructions that required time. Vanessa listened from the kitchen doorway while I spoke. After I hung up, she asked what required time meant. I do not know. You did not ask? She said she would meet with us after Thanksgiving. After Thanksgiving? Vanessa nearly shouted. That is 4 months after the funeral. The orchard harvest is still being completed. Dad had arrangements with local workers. Those workers are not family. They are people he promised to pay. And I am your wife. She was no longer hiding the hierarchy inside her mind. Workers, neighbors, and young people George had helped were obstacles between her and money she considered marital. In September, a developer mailed an updated purchase proposal to the farmhouse. Vanessa opened it without telling me. I found the packet inside her tote bag because she asked me to bring her car keys from it. The offer valued the orchard and woodland at $3.4 million if the county approved a zoning change. Several pages contained her handwritten notes. Lake house, Lexus, investment property, Italy. Pay Monica back. You opened Dad's mail? I asked. It was addressed to the estate. You do not represent the estate. I am married to the only heir. You do not know that. She snatched the packet from me. Who else would he leave it to? The mechanic kid? A church? The contempt in her voice made Marcus's name unnecessary. Maybe. Do not be ridiculous. Dad's property was his, and you are his son. That is a relationship, not an invoice. Vanessa stared at me as though I had become dangerous. The following week, she purchased a luxury SUV using our joint emergency card for the down payment. She told me afterward, describing it as a smart move before interest rates rose. The payment exceeded our mortgage. Return it, I said. No. That card is for medical emergencies and the business. The inheritance will cover it. There is no confirmed inheritance. Then call Helen and make her confirm it. Return the SUV. Vanessa folded her arms. I am tired of living like your father. You never lived like my father. He paid cash for what he owned. She did not return it. I removed myself from the joint card and froze new charges, which she called financial abuse. Monica posted a vague message online about husbands who controlled independent women, and Vanessa shared it with a broken heart emoji. She had transformed a boundary into public mistreatment. I saved the post but did not respond. The final break came at Thanksgiving. Vanessa insisted on hosting her mother, Monica, 2 cousins, and several friends from work. She said the holiday would help us move forward. I wanted a quiet meal at the orchard, but she called that unhealthy attachment. When I came home Wednesday night, the dining room looked like a magazine spread. Framed photographs from our marriage stood on the sideboard. George appeared in none of them. On the kitchen island sat a presentation folder titled Keller Family Legacy Plan. Inside were printed property valuations, house listings, travel plans, and a proposed timeline for selling the orchard. What is this? I asked. A conversation aid. For whom? Everyone has questions. Your family has questions about my father's land? Our future affects them too. One page showed a lake house with the words, new family home. Another showed an estimated sale figure with portions assigned to vehicle upgrades, Monica's event business, and a down payment for Vanessa's mother to move closer. You promised money to your sister? An investment. From property you do not own. Property you will own. I closed the folder. This will not be discussed tomorrow. You do not control the conversation. I control whether my father becomes a Thanksgiving presentation. Her eyes hardened. You are acting like a grieving child, and you are acting like his death was a promotion. She slapped me. The sound was not loud. It did not need to be. We stood in the bright kitchen, staring at each other. Vanessa looked shocked by what she had done, then quickly became angrier because apology would have required humility. You pushed me, she said. No, you have ignored me for months. I have asked you not to spend money we do not have. You have made me feel ashamed for wanting a better life. You should feel ashamed for planning it around my father's grave. She left the room. Thanksgiving began with champagne and photographs. Vanessa performed warmth so convincingly that I briefly wondered whether the slap had happened. Her mother praised the SUV, and Monica joked that Countryland had finally become useful. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa stood and announced that after a difficult year, we were entering a season of abundance. She placed the legacy folder beside my plate and began explaining that George's orchard would soon create opportunities for the entire family. People applauded. I stared at her. "Sit down," she smiled tightly. "Ryan is still emotional, but he will understand." There is nothing to announce. Ryan is still emotional, but he will understand. There is nothing to announce. The property offer is public information. The land is not yours. It will be ours. You do not know that. Her mother said grief sometimes made men afraid of change. Monica added that George would not want valuable property wasted. "You did not know him?" I said. Vanessa's smile disappeared. "Do not embarrass me in my home. You are presenting my dead father's property to people he barely met. Because somebody has to think practically. Return the SUV." The room went still. Vanessa's face flushed. "We will discuss that privately." "You made the money public." She leaned toward me across the candles. Her voice lowered, but everyone heard. "If you will not share the inheritance willingly, I will divorce you and take what the law says is mine." Her mother gasped theatrically. Monica watched me as though waiting for a fight. I felt every year of the marriage gather inside one clear moment. The comments about Dad's truck, the funeral post, the lake house, the open mail, the slap, and now the threat delivered at Thanksgiving. I did not beg. I did not raise my voice. "Then file," I said. Vanessa blinked. "What? If money you have never seen matters more than this marriage, file." "You do not mean that." "I do." Her face changed from triumph to suspicion. She had expected panic, because panic would prove I still believed losing her was worse than losing myself. "Fine," she said. "Maybe I will. Do what you need to do." I stood, took George's old coat from the hall closet, and left my own Thanksgiving dinner before dessert. I drove to the orchard through freezing rain. The farmhouse was dark, but the kitchen still smelled faintly of apples and wood smoke. I sat at George's table wearing his coat and cried until my chest hurt. I cried for him, the marriage, and the man who had spent years translating contempt into stress. Around midnight, Marcus arrived carrying 2 coffees. He did not ask how he knew where I was. "She posted," he said. Vanessa had shared a photograph from dinner with my empty chair visible. The caption read, "Sometimes growth means accepting when someone chooses grief over family." Her friends had already filled the comments with support. I looked at the picture and laughed once. She threatened divorce over money. I know. How? She put enough of it in the caption without realizing. I stayed at the orchard. Vanessa filed for divorce 10 days later and moved into her mother's guest room, taking the SUV and most of the furniture she had selected. She drained our shared vacation account for a large retainer and charged new clothes to the card I had frozen, opening another account when that failed. Her attorney demanded a list of George's property and expected inheritance. I hired a practical local attorney to protect the shop and offered Vanessa a fair division of our home and savings. She rejected it. She wanted the orchard value included. She also wanted me to cover the SUV, her legal expenses, and temporary support based on wealth she insisted I was hiding. Every message began with the phrase, "Once the estate is disclosed." I had no disclosure because Helen had not completed George's instructions. My calm made Vanessa paranoid. She told relatives I was hiding millions and repeatedly photographed the orchard from the road. One afternoon, I found her inside the farmhouse going through drawers. "How did you get in?" I asked. "I still have the key you gave me. That was before Dad died. I am your wife. You filed for divorce." She held up an envelope from Heartland Trade's house. "Is this where the money went?" "Put it down. Your father was giving thousands to strangers while you worked yourself sick." Those strangers included Marcus. Her face twisted. "So the mechanic gets our inheritance?" Marcus had walked in behind me and heard every word. Vanessa turned, embarrassed only because the person she insulted was present. "I did not mean—" "You did," I said. Marcus looked at her calmly. "George gave me boots and a chance. Ryan gave me a job. Neither one ever called it inheritance." Vanessa left after I demanded the key. That evening, she posted that I had chosen employees over marriage. I did not reply. Thanksgiving passed into winter. I worked, slept badly, and finally joined a grief group after Marcus left the brochure on my desk 3 weeks in a row. It gave me a room where sadness did not become evidence that someone else deserved money. In early January, Helen called. She asked me to meet at the orchard with Marcus, the neighboring farmer, and the director of Heartland Trade's house. Vanessa's attorney insisted on attending because he believed the meeting involved assets. I allowed it. We gathered in George's kitchen on a gray morning, while snow covered the orchard rows. Vanessa arrived in a new wool coat and sat beside her attorney with a leather folder. She looked around the room like a buyer inspecting a property. Helen placed one envelope on the table. "George did not leave the orchard to Ryan," she said. Vanessa smiled slightly, perhaps imagining a more complicated structure she could still challenge. Helen continued, "He sold the development rights last spring to a conservation partnership. The payment cleared his remaining obligations and funded the plan he had discussed for several years." Vanessa's smile disappeared. I stared at Helen. "Dad sold the development rights?" "Yes. The land cannot become a resort community. It will remain orchard, woodland, and training property." "Who owns it?" "Heartland Trade's house now owns 60 acres, including the farmhouse, barn, and south orchard. The neighboring cooperative owns the commercial fruit operation and has guaranteed jobs for program participants. Keller Mechanical receives a long-term lease on the repair barn for training apprentices. The remaining woodland is protected permanently." The room went completely still. Vanessa's attorney asked about the $3.4 million proposal. Helen said George had rejected it. Instead, he accepted a smaller conservation payment and combined it with savings to create housing and paid apprenticeships for young adults aging out of foster care. The farmhouse would hold 6 residents. The barn would become a mechanical and electrical training center. Marcus covered his mouth with one hand. "He named me as program director?" he asked. Helen nodded. "He said you knew what a locked door felt like and what an open one could change." I could barely breathe. "What did he leave me?" Vanessa turned toward me sharply. The question escaped my mouth not from greed but confusion. Helen's expression softened. "He paid off the remaining loan on Keller Mechanical's building. He left you the tools in his workshop, his pickup, and a personal account of $72,000. He also left this." She pushed the envelope toward me. My name, Ryan, appeared in George's blocky handwriting. Vanessa's attorney flipped through his notes. "So there is no multi-million-dollar property owned by Mr. Keller?" "No." "No expected sale proceeds?" "No." "And the land transfer was completed before George Keller's death?" "Correct." He looked at Vanessa with the expression of a professional, realizing his client had built an entire strategy on a fantasy. "We need to speak privately." Vanessa ignored him. "He gave away millions to strangers?" Helen's voice remained calm. "He chose a smaller payment so the land could serve people instead of becoming luxury cabins." "That is insane," Marcus lowered his hand. "It sounds like George." Vanessa turned toward me. "You knew." "I did not. You let me destroy our marriage over money you knew was gone. You threatened to destroy our marriage before either of us knew anything. You could have stopped me. I asked you repeatedly to stop spending. You should have fought for me." The sentence revealed everything. She wanted my resistance because resistance would allow her to call the ending tragic. My acceptance made the choice hers. "I did fight for you," I said, "for years. I defended you to Dad, to Marcus, and to myself. I stopped when you made money the condition for staying." Her mother, who had joined by speakerphone, began crying and said George had manipulated the situation from beyond the grave. Helen ended the call. Vanessa's attorney closed his folder. Without the orchard, the divorce involved our house, savings, debts, and business income, not the imagined fortune. Vanessa had already spent far beyond what those assets could support. Her SUV deposit, legal retainer, clothes, and event reservations remained real, even though the inheritance did not. "What about the lake house deposit?" I asked. She looked away. "What lake house deposit?" her attorney said. Vanessa had placed $25,000 from our shared savings on the Mendota property, contingent on financing she expected after the inheritance. The deadline had passed, the deposit was gone. She had also promised Monica money to expand her event business and booked an Italy trip on credit. Helen did not lecture her. Marcus did not gloat. That made Vanessa more furious than judgment would have. I opened George's letter after everyone left. I sat at the same kitchen table where he died, his old pickup visible through the window. "Ryan," the letter began, "if Helen is reading my plan to you, then I am gone and you finally know what I did with the orchard. I hope you are angry only long enough to ask why. Land can become money once. It can become a place for people many times. Marcus taught me that one decent chance can outlive the person who gives it. You taught me that work becomes a life when somebody trusts you with it. The shop building is yours because you built the business inside it. The orchard was never your burden to carry or your wife's prize to collect. I saw how Vanessa spoke about your hands, your work, and my truck. I kept quiet because I did not want to force you to choose while I was alive. Maybe that was cowardly. Maybe it was love. I decided the best protection I could leave was a life that still belonged to you after anyone discovered there was no fortune attached. Keep the pickup if it runs. Sell it if it does not. Stay long enough to hear whether your own life runs right. Love, Dad. I read the letter until the words blurred. George had not left me millions. He had left me a paid-off shop, a reliable business, a modest cushion, and freedom from a woman who measured my value by what his death could buy. It was more than enough. The divorce never became the war Vanessa expected. Once the fantasy disappeared, we divided our ordinary house, savings, and debts. I kept Keller Mechanical, and she eventually traded the SUV for something she could afford. There was no courtroom speech about greed. Real consequences were quieter. The lake house returned to the market. Italy was canceled. Monica stopped answering calls when the promised investment disappeared. Co-workers who had admired Vanessa's projected lifestyle lost interest when there was no launch party, no new address, and no inheritance story. She posted about rebuilding after financial abuse. I did not respond. Defending myself online would have kept me inside her performance. Marcus moved into the farmhouse that spring to supervise renovations with the first group of apprentices. Keller Mechanical began offering paid training hours in the repair barn. The first participant was a 19-year-old named Eli who knew nothing about refrigeration but could diagnose a lawnmower by sound. I taught repair classes, while Marcus handled the practical needs. Nobody photographs boots, transportation, meals, and someone to call when quitting felt easier. We named the program Second Start Mechanical. George's name appeared only on a small brass plate inside the barn, because that was as much recognition as he would have tolerated. Vanessa came to the orchard once after the divorce was final. She parked near the barn and watched two apprentices repairing George's pickup. I nearly asked her to leave, but she remained by the fence. "It looks different," she said. "It is different. Do they live here?" "Some of them." "Your father really wanted this?" "For years." She looked toward the farmhouse. "I thought he hated me." "He did not trust you." "Same thing." "No. Hate wants you hurt. Distrust keeps the keys." She flinched. "Did he write about me?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "That he saw how you spoke about my work and his things." She began crying. "I was scared of being poor." "We were never poor. We were ordinary." "That was not a threat until you decided it was." Vanessa said she had grown up watching her mother depend on men who promised security and failed. She had sworn she would never become that woman. "So I kept looking for proof that you could give me more," she said. "And when your father died, I thought this was finally the proof. You threatened divorce before you knew whether there was money." "I know." "You slapped me." "I know." "You turned grief into a budget." She covered her face. "I know." Her apology did not restore love. It did not return the deposit, erase the posts, or make the marriage safe. But I believe she finally understood what she had done. "Can you forgive me?" she asked. "I am trying not to hate you." "That is not what I asked. It is what I can give." She nodded and left. We have not spoken since. I kept George's pickup. It still rattles, and the heater works only on the highest setting. I drive it to the orchard every Sunday. Vanessa once called it embarrassing. Now, when I hear the bad muffler before the engine warms, I remember a man who understood that value and appearance were rarely the same thing. I also kept his brown winter coat, though it hangs awkwardly on me. The $72,000 remains mostly untouched, quietly doing what money should do when it is not being forced to prove anything. Keller Mechanical is busier than ever. Marcus is now my partner. Eli completed his first certification and bought a used car with money he saved himself. Two other residents moved into apartments after steady work. The orchard still produces apples, and the south field still floods after heavy rain, which would have horrified the developers and delighted George. I have learned that inheritance is not simply what arrives after someone dies. It is the habit you carry forward, the standard you maintain when nobody is watching, the line you finally refused to cross because someone who loved you quietly taught you where it belonged. George left me the understanding that work can be dignified without looking impressive, that land can matter without becoming luxury, and that love does not need to announce its value before offering protection. He also left me one difficult truth. I had stayed in a marriage that diminished the people and work I loved because I was afraid ending it would prove I had failed. Walking away did not make the marriage a failure. Remaining after money became the price of respect would have been the failure. The most satisfying part of this story is not that Vanessa lost a fortune. There was no fortune for her to lose. The satisfying part is that my father's death did not become the product she planned to purchase. His orchard became bedrooms, jobs, tools, paychecks, and a place where young people could fail without becoming disposable. My business remained mine. My grief remained mine. My future stopped being a sales presentation at someone else's Thanksgiving table. I did not win because the SUV disappeared or the lake house deposit was lost. I won when I stopped begging a person to value a life she considered beneath her. I won when I accepted that love without respect becomes permission for cruelty. I won when I opened my father's letter and understood that the greatest thing he protected was not land. It was my right to discover that I was enough before anyone attached a number to me. So tell me honestly, if your spouse mocked your hardworking parent, spent an inheritance that had never been promised, and threatened divorce the moment you refused to fund the fantasy, would a sincere apology ever be enough to rebuild the marriage? Or would the threat itself prove that the relationship had already ended?